So, let's go. Number 1. The piece of Earth we found on the moon. Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell spend their second moonwalk trying to find the edge of a crater, and they cannot do it. There's no haze up there. Nothing familiar to measure against. Distance just stops working. They turn back about 20 meters short of the rim without ever knowing how close they got. On the way, they pick up a 9-kilogram rock, and someone nicknames it Big Bertha. It sits in a lab for 48 years. Then, in 2019, somebody looks hard at a 2-gram fragment buried inside it: quartz, feldspar, zircon. On Earth, that combination is boring. It is most of a kitchen countertop. On the moon, it is close to impossible. So they run the chemistry, and the chemistry is worse. That fragment crystallized at around 700 degrees in wet, oxygen-rich conditions. To make it on the moon, you would need to be roughly 170 kilometers down, in an environment nobody thinks the moon has ever had. To make it on Earth, you need to be about 20 kilometers down, which for Earth is a completely ordinary Tuesday. The fragment is 4 billion years old. And here's the part that should bother you. There's no intact 4 billion-year-old surface anywhere on this planet. Earth ate it. The ocean floor gets recycled roughly every 200 million years. Continents wear down, life keeps churning the carbon. Your planet is a machine for destroying its own history, and it has been running without a break for 4.5 billion years. The moon does none of that. No air, no water, nothing moving underneath. A footprint up there lasts millions of years. And 4 billion years ago, the moon sat about 3 times closer than it does now. So when something enormous hit Earth and threw crust into space, a far larger share of it came down on the moon instead of falling back. One model puts roughly 200 kilograms of Earth material on every square kilometer of that surface. 200 kilograms per square kilometer of us. There is a minority view that some strange lunar process could still account for it, and that view has not gone away, but the people who work on this keep arriving at the same answer. So, the oldest piece of Earth anyone has ever held did not come from Earth. It came from 238,000 miles away, inside a rock a man picked up while he was lost. We have brought back about 382 kilograms of the moon in total, which is nothing. Which means the question is not whether there is more Earth up there. It is what else is sitting in that archive that nobody has thought to open. Number 2, the cosmic rays that X-rayed the pyramids. Right now, about 10,000 muons are passing through every square meter of you every minute. You cannot feel it. They were made when something exploded a very long way away, threw a proton across the galaxy, and that proton slammed into the top of your atmosphere and shattered. What comes out the bottom of that collision goes through almost everything, including 2.3 million blocks of limestone. In the 1960s, a physicist named Luis Alvarez had the idea first. Muons lose intensity in proportion to how much mass they cross. So if you sit a detector underneath a pyramid and count muons by the angle they arrive from, a hidden chamber shows up as a direction where too many of them are getting through. He aimed it at Khafra's pyramid. He found nothing. Absolutely nothing. He published that null result in 1970, and the idea more or less went to sleep for 45 years. Then, in 2015, a team wakes it back up with detectors Alvarez would have killed for. And in November of 2017, they announced that there is a void inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu, at least 30 meters long, a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery. Sitting above the Grand Gallery, in solid stone, in a building that human beings have been surveying obsessively since Napoleon brought engineers with him. 30 meters, longer than a tennis court, inside the most measured object in the ancient world. And they did not find it once. 3 different teams using 3 completely different technologies all saw the same excess. Nuclear emulsion film, scintillator detectors, gas detectors, different physics, different failure modes, same hole. Then in 2023, they do it again on the north face and find a corridor about 9 meters long, and this time they get to check their work in the most satisfying way possible. They push an endoscope through a gap between 2 stones and look at it. Sit with that for a second. A particle physics experiment made a prediction about the inside of a 4,500-year-old building, and somebody stuck a camera in and confirmed it. We are still finding rooms in the pyramids, not tunnels under them, not lost cities near them. Rooms, inside, in 2023, which tells you something uncomfortable about how thoroughly we have actually examined the things we think we know best. And if a monument that has been stared at for 200 years still had a room in it, the obvious question is what happens when nobody built a monument at all. Number 3, the 300 drawings that appeared in 6 months. You've seen the Nazca lines, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey with the spiral tail. Enormous figures scraped into a Peruvian plateau, only readable from the air, made somewhere between 100 BCE and 300 CE. Here is what you probably do not know. Finding them is brutally hard. Archaeologists have been walking that desert for about a century, and in all that time, they cataloged somewhere around 430 figurative designs. In 2024, a team pointed a machine learning model at high-resolution imagery and asked it to guess where a more might be. Then they went out and checked. 6 months, 303 new figures. A century of human fieldwork nearly doubled in half a year because something that does not get bored looked at the same pictures we already had. But the genuinely strange part is what the new ones look like. The famous glyphs are what researchers call line type. They average around 90 meters across, they are made by drawing lines, and they mostly show wild animals. The newly found ones are a different animal entirely. They average about 9 meters. They are made by clearing stones off the ground rather than drawing. They cluster along winding footpaths. And they show different things. Humans, domesticated llamas and alpacas, decapitated heads. So you are not looking at one tradition, you are looking at two. The huge ones seem built for gatherings, for a crowd, for something communal. The small ones are built for one person walking a trail who comes around a bend and finds a life-size severed head laid out in stones at their feet. That is a completely different kind of message. That is signage. That is somebody communicating with an individual traveler in a landscape thousands of years ago. And we missed almost all of it until a computer told us where to look. Now, zoom out from Peru. The Nazca Plateau is one of the most photographed archaeological landscapes on the planet, in a desert so dry that nothing grows over anything. It is the easiest possible case. And we had less than 60% of it. So when somebody tells you the evidence for something ancient is not there, hold that number in your head. Sometimes the evidence is not missing. Sometimes we are just very bad at seeing, which is a problem that gets significantly worse when you bury the evidence under a desert. Number 4, the rivers under the Sahara. Dry sand has a property that sounds made up. Long wavelength radar goes straight through it. Visible light stops at the surface. Short radar stops at the surface. But stretch the wavelength out to about 24 centimeters, and, provided the sand is bone dry under about 1% moisture, the signal punches down 2 to 5 meters and bounces off whatever is underneath. Water ruins it instantly. So this only works in the driest places on Earth, which is a very lucky coincidence because the driest place on Earth is exactly where you want to look. In 1981, the Space Shuttle Columbia carried a radar instrument into orbit and pointed it at the eastern Sahara. At the Salima sand sheet, which from above is one of the most featureless surfaces on the planet. Flat, empty, nothing. The radar came back with valleys, not small ones, a whole drainage network buried under the sand sheet, rivers that had not carried water in an unimaginably long time, invisible from the ground, invisible from a plane, invisible to anyone standing directly on top of them. So the researchers went out and dug where the rivers used to be, and they found stone tools, hand axes, Middle Stone Age material. People had lived along those banks because the Sahara has not always been the Sahara. Between roughly 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, Earth's axial wobble shifted the monsoon north, and the desert turned green. Grassland, trees, cattle, fishing villages. Lake Megachad covered around 350,000 square kilometers, which is larger than Germany. Lake Chad today is under 2,000 square kilometers. That is not erosion over eons. That is a continent-sized inhabited landscape being deleted in a few thousand years, which in geological terms is a blink. There are stone circles out there with proposed astronomical alignments, roughly 7,000 years old, now sitting in absolute hyper-arid nothing. And the only reason anyone knows the rivers were ever there is that we put a radar in space and shot it downward through the ground. So think about the standard argument. If somebody had been here before us, we would have found something. Would we? We needed orbital radar to find rivers. We needed a computer to find drawings sitting in the open. We needed particles from a dead star to find a room in a pyramid. And so far, every one of these has been us finding what we left behind. That changes now. Number 5, the supernovae in the seafloor. There is an isotope called iron-60, and it has a beautifully unforgiving property. Its half-life is about 2.6 million years, which means any iron-60 that was around when Earth formed is completely, absolutely gone. 4.5 billion years is roughly 1,700 half-lives. Nothing survives that. Nothing. So if you find iron-60 in Earth's crust, there is exactly one explanation available to you. It arrived recently, and it arrived from space. And it is not made in ordinary places. It comes out of massive stars, and it gets scattered when those stars explode. Now go and pull sediment cores off the floor of the Pacific, the Indian, and the Atlantic Oceans, and count it. It is there. In all three. Global. And it is not smeared evenly through the record. It comes in pulses. One between roughly 1.5 and 3.2 million years ago. Another between 6.5 and 8.7 million. Somebody worked out where they came from. Supernovae at around 90 to 100 parsecs. Call it 300 light years. Close enough that when they went off, the sky was bright enough to read by in the middle of the night for weeks. There's iron-60 in Apollo lunar samples. There's iron-60 in Antarctic snow that fell recently. We are still moving through the debris. The sun is currently sitting inside a cavity in interstellar space about 300 light years across. And that cavity was carved out by those same explosions. You do not live near the blast site. You live inside it. Now here's where I have to be careful with you, because this is where a lot of videos would start lying. Everything I just said is solid. Measured, replicated, published, boring in the good way. What comes next is not. Because that first pulse between 1.5 and 3 million years ago lands right on top of something else. Around 2.8 million years ago, our ancestors change. Australopithecus starts becoming Homo, and some researchers have proposed a chain. More cosmic rays means more muons at ground level, which means more radiation exposure and possibly more lightning, which means more wildfires, which means forest gives way to open savanna, which is exactly the environment that rewards standing upright. That is a hypothesis. The timing is real. The mechanism is plausible. The causation is not demonstrated, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But the confirmed part alone is enough to sit with. Stars died. The debris is in the ocean floor and in the snow outside. And the sky was doing things to this planet long before anybody was writing any of it down. Sometimes, though, it does not take 300 light years. Number 6, the airburst argument. June 1908. Something enters the atmosphere over Siberia. It never reaches the ground. Instead, the pressure of the air tears it apart, and it releases something like 10 to 15 megatons in a single flash. 2,150 square kilometers of forest go flat. That is roughly the area of Greater London. Herders 65 kilometers away are thrown off their feet, and one of them describes heat so intense he thought his shirt was burning. Windows break hundreds of kilometers out. There is no crater. There has never been a crater. Tunguska is the most famous impact event of the 20th century, and it left no hole in the ground at all. Then, in 2013, a 20-meter rock comes in over Chelyabinsk and detonates with about 500 kilotons. Roughly 1,500 people are hurt, almost all of them by their own windows. Again, no crater, so the physics is not in question. Objects do explode over inhabited ground and leave nothing that looks like an impact. If you were digging on that Siberian forest floor in 10,000 years, you would not find a crater to tell you what happened. And this is where the video stops being a tour of clever instruments, because in 2007, a group of researchers proposed that this happened at the end of the last ice age. 12,900 years ago, they argued, an object detonated over North America and helped trigger a 1,200-year cold snap, a megafauna extinction, and the collapse of the Clovis culture. Their evidence was a boundary layer containing nanodiamonds, magnetic microspherules, melt glass, and a spike of platinum. That platinum spike does show up in a Greenland ice core. For about 15 years, this has been one of the loudest arguments in the field, and it has not gone well for the hypothesis. Other teams failed to replicate key findings. The nanodiamond identifications were challenged, The dating across sites turned out inconsistent. A major review in 2023 concluded the case is not supported. In 2018, a 31-kilometer crater was found under Greenland's ice, and it looked, briefly, like the answer, until it was redated in 2022 to 58 million years old, and one high-profile paper claiming an airburst destroyed a Bronze Age city was retracted outright. I am telling you that on purpose, because the honest version of this item is not scientists are hiding something. It is the opposite. The field is aggressively policing its own most exciting story in public, and the exciting story is losing. What survives is smaller and stranger. Airbursts are real, they leave almost nothing. And our ability to detect an ancient one is genuinely poor. Which is exactly the gap that people start filling with things they want to be true. Number 7. The Vulture Stone. In southeastern Turkey, there is a hill covered in carved stone pillars that are around 11,000 years old. Göbekli Tepe. Built before pottery, before metal, before writing, before farming, by people who were supposed to be hunting and gathering and not much else. One pillar is catalogued as number 43. It is covered in animals arranged in rows, and above them there is a vulture with its wings spread, and next to the vulture there is a disc. In 2017, 2 researchers published a claim about that pillar in a peer-reviewed archaeoastronomy journal. Their argument was that the animals are not decoration, they are constellations. And because Earth's axis wobbles on a cycle of about 25,900 years, the position of a constellation is effectively a clock. So if you can read the animals as stars, you can read the pillar as a date. The date they arrived at was around 10,950 BCE, which, if you were paying attention 30 seconds ago, is the Younger Dryas. They were arguing that this pillar is a memorial, a date stamp for the sky event we were just talking about, carved by the people who watched it happen. It is a fantastic story. And you should know that the archaeologists who actually dug that site published a direct rebuttal saying no. Their objections are specific and they are not gentle. The enclosures were not all standing at the same time, so treating the site as one observatory is wrong. The animals appear all over the region in contexts that have nothing to do with the sky. And crucially, the method lets you choose which carvings count as stars and which do not, and once you can do that, you can find any date you want in anything. That last one matters more than the rest combined. It is the difference between reading evidence and reading a Rorschach test. So where does that leave you with a real published claim argued by real researchers, rejected by the people who know the site best? Not a conspiracy, not a cover-up. A disagreement weighted heavily toward the excavators sitting in the open where anyone can go and read both sides. And that is the actual lesson of this one, which is less fun than the story. When the evidence is thin enough, you can make it say almost anything, and wanting it to be true is exactly the wrong qualification for the job. But sometimes the erase thing is not ambiguous at all. Sometimes somebody just scraped it off the page. Number 8. The star catalogue hidden under the prayers. Parchment used to be expensive, so when a text stopped being useful, people scraped the ink off and wrote something else on top. The result is called a palimpsest, and it is one of the great accidental crimes of history because the erasing was never quite complete. There is a manuscript called the Codex Climaci Rescriptus. On the surface, it is Christian prayers, ordinary medieval devotional material. Underneath, somebody found Greek. Multispectral imaging is the trick. You photograph the page under different wavelengths, including ultraviolet, and the residue of the scraped ink fluoresces differently to the newer text sitting on top. Run the processing, and the erased layer floats back up out of the page. What floated up was a list of star coordinates. The passage gives positions for the 4 corner stars of Corona Borealis. Just numbers. And numbers are the best possible thing to find, because a star catalog dates itself. Precession is slowly dragging every coordinate in the sky, so you can run the wobble backwards until the numbers fit, and the sky will tell you what year somebody was standing outside taking measurements. The answer came out around 129 BCE. That falls directly inside the working life of Hipparchus, who is the man who discovered precession in the first place by comparing his own observations against Babylonian records that were already centuries old when he got them. Historians had known Hipparchus made a star catalogue. It was referenced, quoted, argued over. Nobody had a copy. The oldest surviving one was Ptolemy's, written roughly 300 years later. and there has been a low-grade argument for centuries over whether Ptolemy did his own work or quietly recycled Hipparchus. Now, there is something to check it against, and the accuracy is the part that should get you. The recovered coordinates land within 1 degree, and in several cases they beat the numbers Ptolemy published 3 centuries afterwards. This is a man with no telescope, no clock worth the name, and no optics, measuring the sky to about the width of your thumb, held at arm's length. We nearly lost that permanently, not to a fire, not to a war, not to deep time, to somebody who needed the paper. That is the whole problem in one object. Knowledge does not survive because it is important. It survives because of luck, and because somebody was too lazy to scrape hard enough. Now imagine the things nobody wrote on top of. Number 9. The mass under the Antarctic ice. You can weigh a planet from orbit, and the way you do it is ridiculous. Fly 2 satellites in the same orbit, one in front of the other, about 220 kilometers apart. Then measure the distance between them constantly, to within about a micron. When the leading satellite passes over something unusually dense, that mass pulls it forward a fraction earlier than it should go, and the gap between the two changes by an amount far smaller than a human hair. That is it. That is the whole method. You are detecting buried mountains and hidden water and dense rock by watching 2 objects in space drift infinitesimally relative to each other. Point that at East Antarctica, at a region called Wilkes Land, and you find something. There's a concentration of dense material down there, roughly 300 kilometers across, sitting under about 1.6 kilometers of ice. Nobody has ever stood on the surface above it. Nobody has ever seen the rock. The mean temperature up top is well below minus 50, and the nearest thing to a witness is a pair of satellites doing arithmetic. In 2006, researchers proposed an interpretation that is either spectacular or wrong. They suggested it could be the remains of an impact structure about 480 kilometers across, and floated a possible link to the end Permian extinction, which is the worst thing that has ever happened to life on this planet. Now, I want to be straight with you about this one because it gets passed around the internet as a settled fact, and it is not. Dense material under the ground is not automatically a crater. Mantle plumes do this. Big igneous intrusions do this. The ordinary crustal structure of a subglacial basin does this, and there happens to be an enormous subglacial basin in exactly that spot. And you cannot settle the argument the normal way, by going and looking for shocked quartz, because the rock is under a mile of ice and nobody is drilling that anytime soon. So the anomaly is real, the crater is a hypothesis, and not the leading one. But hold on to the shape of the situation rather than the answer. There is a feature the size of a small country on the planet you live on, and the sum total of what we know about it is a number on a gravity map. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we have of the ground under East Antarctica. So when the question is whether something could be hidden down here, the honest reply is that we have not finished looking at our own planet yet. Number 10. The telescope we turned around. For 60 years, the search for other civilizations has pointed outward. Radio dishes aimed at other stars, telescopes hunting for the chemical exhaust of industry in the atmospheres of planets we will never visit, all of it looking away. Then, in 2013, 2 researchers published a paper in a mainstream aerospace journal with a very simple and slightly unsettling proposal. Search the moon. Their argument is not romantic, it is economic. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has been photographing the lunar surface since 2009 at around half a meter per pixel. That data already exists. It is already paid for. Nobody has ever systematically searched it for anything that does not look natural, because nobody thought to. And the moon is the correct place to look for the reason we started with. Nothing up there decays. The only real erosion is micrometeorites slowly stirring the top few centimeters of dust. A surface feature can stay legible for 10 million to a billion years. Down here, the ocean floor is completely recycled every 200 million. So if you wanted to know whether anything had ever been here before us, you would not dig on Earth. Earth is the worst possible archive. You would look at the thing overhead that has been sitting perfectly still, taking notes since before anything on this planet had a spine. Critics are right about the obvious problem. Finding nothing proves nothing. You can always search a bit more and the hypothesis never dies, which is a bad property for a scientific idea to have. But look at what this video actually has been. A piece of Earth found on the moon, a room found by particles from a dead star, 300 drawings found by a machine, rivers found by radar, exploded stars found in the mud, a star catalogue found underneath somebody's prayers. Not one of those was discovered by digging in the right place. Every single one came from an instrument that could see through something we assumed was solid. There is an Earth quasi-satellite called Kamo-Oalua, quietly orbiting alongside us, and its spectrum suggests it is a chunk of the moon that got knocked loose and never left. It has been out there the whole time. We only worked out what it was recently. The universe is not hiding anything from you. It has been leaving the receipts in places we did not think to check. We keep saying there is no evidence of anyone before us. What we actually mean is that we have never once looked properly, and every single time we have built a new way of seeing, something we were sure was not there turned out to be. The record isn't missing, it's off-planet, buried, scraped off, or sitting in data nobody has opened, and we have only just started learning how to read.